Okay, so I'm gonna try to tackle this. Probably the one of the most misunderstood concepts within SharePoint Online. SharePoint security, the difference between a SharePoint group and a Microsoft 365 group, when to use one over the other, whether the repercussions are the results of using one versus the other. Actually, a lot to unpack here. So let's get started. All right, so in this video, we're actually going to talk about SharePoint security. This is probably one of the most misunderstood concepts within SharePoint Online, mostly because we have a new layer of security with the Microsoft 365 groups in certain SharePoint site templates. So if you look at this, let's just kind of break this down using a whiteboard. So I have two site types mainly for modern SharePoint. So we have the modern site type, and then you have the modern site type for Teams. So let's just call this the SP Teams. And then you have the modern site template for SP communication sites. The main difference between these, and this is more than just the navigation being on the left versus the top, the main difference is the security groups that represent the two. And there's some other differences as well, but that's the main difference. Eventually, what's going to happen for these SharePoint team templates, Microsoft is releasing the option to move the left nav to the top. So you actually have an option to move the navigation to the top, and you're not going to be limited to choosing the communication site only because you want the top nav. So that's coming. So it's really important to really understand once they do this, and then these sites between the two become looking very similar because now you can put the navigation on the top on either site. What is the true difference between them? And it's really the security groups and the security structure or strategy between the two. Now for SharePoint Teams, and this is the one we're going to focus on in this video, is the SharePoint Teams, because communications are easy. If you understand Teams, communication templates are easy. With the Teams, what's going to happen once this is provisioned, there's a difference between SharePoint groups and Azure security groups. Within the SP team, and depending on, let's just keep it simple. When this is provisioned, you're going to have three groups. You're going to have the owner group, the members group, and then the visitors group. When the owner group can do anything in the site, you can't lock the owner out in anything within the site. So they're the owner, everything is exposed, they can get access to everything. As far as members you can lock out. So you can lock members down to only certain elements of the site. You can control what permission levels, what members can and cannot do. Visitors usually have read-only access. So they're just there to consume content. They really can't contribute or add anything. You can get granular with the permissioning and allow visitors to, for example, upload documents or to add items to a list. And that's going to be item level or itemized security where you kind of break it in halves. And we're going to talk through that. But the interesting layer is when you have these M365 security groups. You actually only get one. Understand that with the M365 security group, there's only one group, but there's two levels within that group. There's the members of the M365 security, and then there's the owner of the M365 security. And if you're working with Microsoft Teams, you see that and you play with that often, especially if you're an owner of a team, because what happens in the Microsoft team, you grant owner access and you grant member access, and there's no visitor access, other sorts, unless you dig deep and really start to manipulate things within Microsoft Teams. And that's exactly what is happening. They're using that one M365 group, but they're using the different permission levels within that group to determine if a user is an owner or a member. In the context of a SharePoint team, you're going to have that M365 group. All your owners are going to be wrapped inside of the SharePoint owner group. The members of that group, the M365 group. It's going to be wrapped in the member SharePoint group, and then you'll be able to grant access. But understand the two are different. Understand that layer. If you understand the layer, then when you go to grant access, you will know when you add someone as a member, or if you're trying to give someone edit access, we're going to walk through the difference between adding them to the M365 member group or just adding them to the SharePoint member group, because you just want them to edit access and not everything that goes along with the membership of being part of the M365 member. Now let's kind of break that down. With the M365 member, understand with the M365 member group, you get and you'll see this on the left-hand nav, and that's why I'm kind of drawing this out. You would get a email box. So that security group, that M365 group, actually has an incoming email address, right? There's an inbox that goes along with that. There's a shared calendar that goes along with that. And then it becomes the underpinning to give you access to other M365 assets. So like a planner, if you decide to associate this to a Microsoft Teams, that security group then becomes used within that team, and so on and so forth. The biggest distinction you can make is that the main difference between the M365 group and the SharePoint group is that the SharePoint group is only in the context of the SharePoint site, whereas the M365 security group is available as a security group across all assets within Microsoft 365. So you can reference this 365 group outside of SharePoint. And we understand that there's several workloads. There's a ton of workloads, right? So if you look at the waffle, there's a ton of workloads here. So now this M365 group, you can now use as a security group to, as an example, grant that group access to a particular Power App, or grant that group access to a particular folder within someone's OneDrive, or use that group to auto-populate or to batch populate a Microsoft Teams. As of today, you can't add a group as a team. What it end up doing is that when you specify the group, it just takes all your members and copies them in the respective groups for that team, and it doesn't keep them in sync. So if you add new members, you have to keep adding them down. So there's a misunderstanding here. But understand that you can start using them as security groups. Even in Exchange, you can manipulate the group and so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and see this in practice. Now that we kind of have a high-level understanding the difference between M365 group and the SharePoint group, let's try to see real-world scenarios when you would use a 365 group that comes with this team versus just adding the user to a SharePoint group that comes with the same team. And let's walk through that. So here I have, let's just pretend we submitted a help desk ticket and someone provisioned us a Microsoft 365 site. A Microsoft SharePoint team site. Okay, so we submitted the help desk ticket to the SharePoint platform group. They provisioned this site, and because of their SharePoint governance, you have to minimum have 2 members, right? So I'm the primary member, then we have Madison Hatmaker as the secondary owner or member owner, right? So each one of these sites have to have at least 2 owners, and that's a real best practice, right? So you should, when you provision these sites, whatever you put in your governance, your SharePoint governance, make sure minimum you have 2 owners per site, primary and a backup. So now we have this set up, but notice once the site is provisioned, a couple of things are happening here. Ignore the internal only, because that's just me having a sensitivity label configured in security and compliance, so where we can tattoo each one of our sites at a certain security level, and certain governance pieces will kick in, right? So ignore that piece. But this piece is out of the box. This private group, and we talk the difference between private group sites and public group sites and what that means, and the gotcha and the certain things you should watch out for. And also notice that here explicitly, if I click on this, it shows the members. Understand, this membership is showing who are the members of the M365 group, not necessarily the SharePoint group, but the M365 group. And that becomes important. When you look over here on the left, click on conversations, this bounced me into an Outlook experience, because what it take me to is the console engineering inbox that's tied to the M365 group, right? So a lot of people make the mistake of requesting the site, then they request a distribution list, then they may or may not request some M365, a Microsoft Teams site or Microsoft Teams, right? All of those are kind of baked in and glued together within that M365. So really, your starting point should be your SharePoint Teams site. And once you have that, understand that the underlying or the underpinning underneath that is the M365 group. You already have a distribution list for that group, and you have the option to create a team for that group, right? So there's no reason to request these different assets. And this is the distribution list or the shared mailbox for that team. Now, here in a second, I'm going to show you how you can request your administrator to allow certain things for this team, for this, this Exchange mailbox. You can allow things like when the mailbox receives mail, all the members get a copy of it in their personal inboxes, right? Because sometimes that can be their notification that says, oh, someone sent our group a message. Now it appears in my inbox, and I can set up Outlook rules and all that stuff to separate it from my regular. You can also configure this SharePoint group, this Exchange box, to receive mail from the outside. By default, that's turned off. You can also set this up to where your members or certain members within the M365 group, not the SharePoint group, the M365 group, can actually send emails on the behalf of this group. And all of that is admin configuration. Some of it was in the group settings, some of it is in Exchange, but best believe it's all possible with the group that you get by default. So don't make the mistake of what others are doing of requesting additional groups on top of this SharePoint site. The SharePoint Teams site has everything that you need, and it should be used as a launching pad. We always notice this here with the real-time chat option to add this to Microsoft Teams. Most of the time this gets in the way, it becomes very annoying. We tend to hide it, but this is something you can grow into. Even if you hide it, when you go into Microsoft Teams and you go to create a team, stop at the option where it says add to an existing group. This is the group they're referring to, the group that comes with this site. Now, this is where the distinction is made. If you go to the gear icon and you go to site permissions, notice what happens with this sharing of the site. And I don't know why. You go to site permissions. Notice how you have these three groups here. These are your SharePoint groups. And you will notice the stitching between them. If you expand out the site members, that's your M365 group. If you span out the SharePoint site owners group, that's your M365 group. Now, best believe they're the same group. We know that security groups have two roles. You have the members of the group, and you have the owners of the security group. And that's the distinction that they're making here. So you see, they changed the name, but you would never, when you do a search, you would never find this one. You will always find this, but understand that this name represents the one group. And this view right here just shows the two roles within that same group. So we're going to show all this in practice. So just wrap your head around that there's different layers, but understand there's a clear separation between the SharePoint group and the M365 group. And this is the SharePoint group is the outer container. And within that, you're going to have your 365 groups as your inner. And we've been using this pattern all along, right? Way before SharePoint Online. Even with SharePoint 2010, 07, 13, 16, we always had security groups, AD groups, that were wrapped inside of SharePoint groups. And then everywhere we use that SharePoint group, it will always propagate that security access to the inner security groups. That's exactly what's happening here, right? Now, here's the distinction. As a SharePoint owner, site owner, it's really important you understand the distinction. If I'm granting access, if I'm going to site permissions and add members, notice what it's asking me. Do you want to add it to your M365 group, or do you want to add it to your SharePoint site? Prior to this video, you probably thought they were one and the same, because under the covers, especially in the context of SharePoint, they yield the same results. If you're trying to get someone editing access and you add them to either one of these groups, they still have editing access to your SharePoint site. But if you add it to the member, now they're a member of that distribution group. Now they're a member of your security group and everything else that security group have access to. And most of the times, all we're trying to do in this scenario is just grant them access to upload documents to our document library, or grant them access to manage the news on this particular site. We don't really want them to be part of our security group and give them access to everything else that the group has access to, right? So let's walk through that scenario from the top. So from the top, let me just hit refresh to clear all my pop-up windows. Here's the scenario. One scenario is, let's just look at this and talk through some real case scenarios. Here I am a console engineering group. This is a department. And what we have here, this department has two sites. We have a Microsoft Teams site, which is for inter-department communication and collaboration. Only the people in the console engineering group have access to that Microsoft Teams. Nothing that we do within that Microsoft Teams is exposed to the organization. On the flip side, this is what you see here. This is a console engineering site meant to service the organization. This is what we call our outer bound or our outer loop site, where we're providing resources to where it says, oh, you want to understand the latest draft documents, go to the console engineering site on the intranet. Oh, you want to understand the policy for interacting with other vendors, dealing with the console, go to the console engineering's intranet site. Again, this is services we're providing to other departments or users of the organization as a whole. Now, here's the scenario. We have legal who wants to manage policies on our site, and we probably send them policies to review. They redline it or do whatever. They do the final revision, and we want them to automatically upload it here in the site. Manage that on your own. Don't get our team involved. Though we're hosting your documents on our site, we don't necessarily have to be in the middle of each and every update you want to do, right? So we want to delegate that out. So what we're going to do, we're going to give them editing access to the site only, and not necessarily add them to our security group. And to do that, you hit the gear icon, and then you hit site permissions. And let's just say Andre, that's this profile I have here. We only want to give him site only access. So let's just bring in Andre, and he's going to come in, and we want to give him edit access. And yeah, let's just send him an email. Here's the link to the site. All right. So now we have that, and we just go ahead and send that message. Flip over to the Andre persona. This is Andre's inbox. We're going to wait for that invitation to get processed. So it's adding him to the SharePoint group. Now he gets a notification. He clicks on it. It says, Deshaun added you here. He clicks on the link, and everything looks fantastic. Notice here on the left, though, it can be very confusing because his options are very similar to my options as a site owner, right? So if he clicks on conversations, he's going to be taken to this inbox, but his experience is a lot different than my experience. And also, if you click on membership, he's not listed here because he's not part of that M365 group, which is the underpinning to access to that Exchange mailbox, right? So to avoid confusion, this is where the distinction really starts to shine. To avoid confusion, we want to hide these links, the ones that are not relevant to Andre because he's just an editor of the site and not a member of the security group of the site. We want to hide certain options away from him. So in order to do that, what we can do is use audience targeting. So I did edit. I'm clicking this option to enable audience targeting. Let me just save that. Go back into edit now that that's on. Conversations we want to hide from him. So we just go to edit and right here, audience targeting. Now watch what I type here. I'm going to start typing the name of the site, which is also the name of the security group, the M365 group, associated to the site. This is not the SharePoint security group. This is the Azure AD M365 security group, right? And notice I only have one instance of this. I don't have a group for members. I don't have a group for owners, even though in this view, when we talked about permissions and we saw this same name owner, this same name member, that was just, and that part gets a little bit confusing, but we're going to break it down and we're unraveling this onion. Just understand it's one security group with two roles: the owner role, which represents the owner of the security group, and the member role, which represents the members of the security group. So once we have that, we go ahead and click OK. And let's just say notebooks, we want to do the same thing. This notebook, we really want to dedicate to our group only. So we're going to hide the link to this in our navigation. Okay. So now we hit save, go back to Andre's view, right? And now if we hit refresh to kind of clear out the browser cache, notice how conversations is hidden in his view, notebooks is hidden from his view. But if I log in as Madison, who is an owner, okay, so now that I'm logged in as Madison Hatmaker, who's also an owner of the site, you would notice that she has the same navigation as I do. I can also go in and downgrade Madison. So let's just say I want to make Madison a member of the site versus an owner, and then if we flip over to her persona, click refresh, she still sees the same options, right? Even though as a member, she's still going to see the same left navigation options. That's because she's a member of the security group, and which is more than just being a member of the SharePoint group, especially when you start looking at things in the context outside of SharePoint, right? Okay, so let's talk about how else we can use this security. Now that we understand that we're dealing with security groups versus SharePoint groups, we can get really, really granular and really, really fancy on what we allow our members to access. Now, again, I told you about this Andre, who's going to be managing policies within the site. Really, Andre only needs access to a particular folder within the site. Right now, look at he can add news. He can manipulate pages. He has full edit access to the SharePoint group. So let's go ahead and limit that down a little bit. So what we want to do, if we go to site contents, let's take a look at this document library. Well, first thing we want to do, I'm trying to think of the best way to do this. So let's do this. Let's just downgrade his access from, and again, you have to, and that's the thing, once you understand the different layers, there's different switches you have to go to. Let's downgrade Andre's access to read access in general. So we're going to drop him in the visitors group. Now in the visitors group, we also want to give him access to this document library, but not the entire library, but just a folder. Let's just call it policies. And within policies, we want to right click here, manage access. He's going to have read-only access, but this is the only folder we want him to edit. So let's just go here and just type in Andre at this level, and we're going to give him edit access by selecting this, and this is on by default, and then just go ahead and grant access, right? So now if we switch over to Andre's persona and look at the site in his view, notice how all my add options disappeared. He can browse to documents. He can't add anything at the root. He clicks inside of the folder, and then all of a sudden the new and upload and all of the editing options kick in, but that option is only available once he's inside of the policies folder. That's how you lock things down. You can use this scenario, you can use this strategy in many different scenarios. You can use this strategy in, I just want you to edit and manage this one page. What we're going to do is, as an owner, I'm at the site level, I'm going to create a page, not necessarily a news post, but I'm going to create a page, and I'm going to create this for you and just say, okay, these are the legal best practices or whatever the case may be, and I'm okay with just the title. And now I'm going to do the exact same thing. Again, it's the exact same. Once you have this down, it's the exact same strategy. So I go into the pages library. Here's my legal best practices. Go to manage access. And then I'm going to go to direct access and then type in Andre's name. The pencil edit option is already selected for me, right? So that's already selected for me. and then I just go ahead and hit grant access. Right? So now, again, if I switch over to Andre, he can go to pages. He can see other pages. So this is the home page. Notice no edit options here. He clicks on pages, legal best practices. He has the edit option, and he has full control to manage this particular page. Right? He can add in web parts. He can add in other news web parts, configure them. He can decide if he wants comments or not. This is the page he's in charge of. Everything else on the site, he only has read-only access. All right. Again, this is how not only do you use your power of security groups versus SharePoint groups, but also this is how you can delegate access to other members of the site and wall off what they have added access to. All right. So let me show you a couple of gotchas and a couple of capabilities that you have that a lot of people just take for granted, or they really don't have a clear understanding on how to pull these off. So the first thing I want to just show you is that the first thing you want to do is some of the times the use case scenario is that this site is ready. We've been working on this in the background. We're ready to go. We want to make this enabled for everyone in the organization. Here's the biggest mistake I see a lot of people make. They go to the gear icon, site information. They scroll down, say, we're ready to go live. They switch public, and they click save. This is going to make your site available to everyone without a shadow of a doubt. But you don't know, and some of you may have realized this already, and when it's a scrambling mode, once you realize this, you just given everyone in the organization editing capabilities to your site. Now watch what happens. If I go to, even though we locked Andre down, he was good to go. We had him exactly where we needed him to be. Now, as he click the home button, click refresh, look what happened. He can now create pages. He can now create news posts. He can now delete things. He can now move things around. He can now edit the navigation, all this other stuff that he didn't have before. And all of this capability was enabled as soon as we click public from private to public group. This is very similar. That switch from going from private to public group is very similar to creating a Microsoft team with organization level or an organization level team. In the organization level team, everyone in the organization have read and write access to everything in the team. That's not what we want here. So really what we wanted to do, if you go into permission settings, it's an easy fix, but a lot of people don't realize what just happened because they see that option in front of them, not really understand the repercussions or the consequence between setting that setting. Here's your everyone except external user group. Just go ahead and change that permission level from edit to read, and that's going to be right back where you want everyone to be. You just want everyone to be visitors of your site as a read-only access. And actually, once you do this, you do not have to specify anyone that's explicit. I actually remove any explicit access that we had, especially if I'm using the everyone except external user group, because everyone except your guest users, which are your external users, are going to be part of this. So there's no, it actually creates confusion maintaining this moving forward. If someone comes behind you and see, oh, there's something special going on, let me not touch that, or this person doesn't have certain access, and they start to mimic this security noise, this security overlap, because they see it set and they're trying to get someone else to work and they're just trying to mimic access to someone else. So here, any opportunity I have that I have everyone that's listed in the group, I'm explicitly removing everyone else unless they are indeed an external user and they're not part of this group. All right. So now once we do that, we go back to Andre's persona, hit refresh. He's reset back to where he was. If we go to document library, click on policies, edit options are still there because we added him explicitly. Go to the page we want him to maintain. The edit options are still there. Okay. So that's one item that I wanted to highlight. The second item I wanted to highlight is the powerful exchange group, right? Okay, so here I have, I don't know why my conversation has disappeared on the left, but I'm trying to get to my shared mailbox for my M365 group. And I want to show you how you can set other configuration options. So a quick way to do that, and I love going this route too. If you go to the gear icon and then site permissions, and if you expand out in any one of the group, mouse over it, and if you select the option to just click on the group membership and then click on the email tab, see all emails, this is going to take you to the inbox for that particular group. Now, there's a couple of scenarios that you may face with this Exchange mailbox. It really can make it feel like a distribution list. The first thing you want to do is that every member, right, that's part of your M365 group, you probably want them to receive a copy of any incoming email that's been sent to this console email. And sometimes you don't know what the email address is. So that's your console email. Let me see if I mouse over this. That's your email address. So, for any publication, you say, if you got any questions, send the email to this group. Someone on the team will get back with you. This is the monitor email or the shared mailbox that you have. Not only do you have a shared mailbox, you also have a shared calendar. So again, this is where you can publish different things that the groups are having, different activities that the group are having, either webinars or, parties or events or wherever the case may be. There's a group calendar that comes with those M365 groups. Now, the question is, how do I configure other pieces for the group? So if you go into the admin console, and again, for some of us, this may be a help desk ticket, but they would go to the admin console, they would go under here where it says teams and groups, go to active teams. Again, this is going to be an M365 group. Look for the name of the site, which is the exact same name of the group that's given. And then once you click on here and then click on settings, notice the other settings or options you have. So you can allow external people to send emails, right? So if this group is monitoring, maybe there was a campaign that you're doing for clients or vendors or wherever the case may be, and you have them sending emails to a designated group email versus an individual, right? And we understand the fragileness of sending emails to an individual. That individual gets sent to another group or at least an organization or wherever the case may be. Now that whole piece of the process breaks. But if you have them send into a group email, these group emails are going to survive membership, where membership can come and go and different people start monitoring this. So that's why that's a really good scenario where you want external users to send this out. For internal users, this is going to be off or on. It doesn't matter. Internal users can send email here. Here's the option to where you can have them send copies. So as someone sending email to the console engineering group, all your members will receive a copy in their respective inboxes, and that could just be used as a notification that, oh, someone emailed this, let me go to the shared mailbox, process it, and reply to them for that. For whatever reason, if you want to hide this from your global distribution list, if they're in Outlook and they start typing this name and you don't want this to show up, you can hide this from the global address book. Only those who actually know the explicit email will be able to send email. So we want these, let's check this option. So we want this option here to send a copy. The biggest question now is, how do we send, as a member, send emails to the user on the behalf of the console engineering email address? So when I send notifications out, I don't want my name to be from the from address. I want it to feel like that this is coming from the committee, or this email response is coming from the group. So to set that option, you actually have to go to a different area. So let's go to show all, and let's go to Exchange. And this is the classic view of Exchange. Once you right here on the dashboard, click on Groups. And then within Groups, you should see your M365 group. Just double click on that. And then within here, you can see the delivery management, group delegation. So you have the send on the behalf of, and then also send as. So if I add my name here to the send as, so let's just do, type in Clardo. This is going to filter me out. So I just add that here. Let me also add in Madison. Okay, so now Madison and we're the only ones authorized to send on the behalf of the group. So if I go ahead and save this, now what I can do in my inbox, in my personal inbox, I can now switch over to, let me just bounce over here to Outlook. And now as I'm formulating a new message, I have to go down and say, show the from, right? So if I go to this option to show from, and then if I click on from, I can now say other email addresses and start typing in the console engineering. I have so many console. Okay, so now I can, from an email address, go ahead and select this and reply back. So let me just send Andre an email. And if we switch over to Andre's inbox, notice how it came from the console engineers, and then he can reply back. And now all the members will receive a copy of that, as well as we can now go to the actual share inbox and see and process all of this information there, right? So if I go to my inbox, notice how in my personal, I receive Andre's reply, and then also in the group email, I receive Andre's reply. And this is, of course, is a much cleaner inbox because this is only pertaining to that. So now, as a member, I can delete these or archive them or do whatever I have to do to clean them up, because again, there can be many members managing this inbox, and we probably have a process to say, okay, once you acted on something or someone's taken care of, go ahead and clear them out, so that way we understand, it's very clear on what needs to be acted on and what needs not need to be acted on, right? So here we unpacked a lot, right? There was a lot that we had to cover. There's so many keys here. We started out with understanding the difference between a SharePoint team site and a SharePoint communication site. They're both are the modern SharePoint sites, which you should be gravitating towards, right? You should be migrating off of the classic SharePoint. Even if you're in SharePoint Online, get off the classic SharePoint, get on the modern side of the house, because the modern side of the house is the evergreen side of the house. You really have two base templates that you're working with, the communication and the SharePoint team. On the surface, it seemed like the main difference between them is where the navigation is. That soon will become a leveling playing field, because you're going to have options to use to move the left nav on the team site from left to top, and it's going to look very similar to a communication site. The core difference between the two will be that M365 group, and we walk through why that is significant when you want to grant access to the group versus the SharePoint group. And the other piece we cover is how you can delegate access to other members of the organization who may be outside of your immediate department. Then we talk through, and this is the last option, how you can enable certain configuration options on your Exchange piece of your M365 group, to where you can, send copies to members of the M365 group, allow external users to send mail to it, and also configure it to where you can send on the behalf of or send as within that M365 group. There is no need to create a separate team for these SharePoint team sites, a separate distribution list for these SharePoint team sites, or even a separate security group for these SharePoint team sites, because all of that is baked in naturally for you. We then walk through how you connect it to an M365 team, Microsoft Teams, but that's pretty apparent, and we can cover that in enough video. If enough people leave me messages in the chat or enough comments to where that's a need, we can walk through that scenario. In the next video, what we want to cover is how do you make this all come together? Because remember, I talked through how this site is really meant to service the organization. So what happens when this console engineering site have a Microsoft Teams, and what does that mean? And how do you stitch the two together to where members of the console engineering group do not get confused on when to do things inside of their internal team versus when to do things for the site that represents their intranet presence on the main intranet site. I think that's a really good conversation to unpack, because that's a really common scenario, and I see a lot of people stumble on trying to pull it off in an elegant way to where it can scale and it minimize confusion. But until then, Any questions, feel free to leave it in the comments section. And again, thanks for sticking in there with me. Hopefully this was helpful. Really interested in your feedback. If this was helpful, if there's additional questions or concepts that need to be covered, I'm all ears. Until then, I'll take care of yourself and I'll talk to you soon.